I remember sprinting into my elementary school library, which was my favorite place of refuge and source of entertainment as a child. I would happily strum my fingers along the worn edges of my library's most beloved books, which would usually stop at their final destination point of the amazing world of legendary travel aficionado, Mr. Waldo, or Wally, as he's known outside of North America. So, where's Waldo? This is a question that you may have given at least a cursory glance to once in your life. And sure, why wouldn't we want to find Waldo? I mean, he's an incredibly friendly-looking man, and that handsome dimpled chin just completes the fashionable charm of his quintessential red and white striped sweater and hat. Have you realized, though, that no one ever asks who Waldo is? I mean, Waldo is not a self-evident entity. In fact, all we do know about Waldo is that he's constantly traveling to some very busy and populated destinations situated in a fabulously rambunctious alternate universe. In finding Waldo, we're thrown in some pretty chaotic and kaleidoscopic scenes of life. Picture this: a pot-bellied Viking at a pie-eating contest roars furiously at a stressed-out looking serving man who twists his body narrowly from being hit by the unidentified flying projectile that was thrown by an annoyed spectator who placed his bets on the wrong champion. His hard-earned coins are rattling in the deep pockets of a fine, blonde-haired lady as she struts away, children following in her wake. But wait, there's a child who turns left as he's distracted by the wafting smell of freshly baked bread in the air. And in the midst of all this complexity and madness of interwoven stories, a face just pops up as if out of nowhere. Waldo. Smiling mysteriously, with his eyes shielded by his heavy square frames. We don't know what kind of deep thoughts that Waldo is pondering as he deftly winds his way through the book. Has Waldo ever read about Foucauldian discourse analysis? Does Waldo know who Edward Said is and what post-colonial critique looks like? I think Waldo would be a perfect fit for NYU Abu Dhabi's class of 2020, based solely off the number of frequent cosmopolitan points he's racked up over his long career of walking around the world and time traveling. But here's the thing. Who Waldo is doesn't matter so much as the question of where. Because where Waldo is embodies who Waldo is. This is a metaphor for Waldo, the question of where. And so I confess that I no longer am interested in who I am, because soul-searching in hopes of caging and capturing an elusive shadow of an essentialist self-identity that always seems to be shape-shifting and transforming is just not productive or realistic anymore. It's a silly game we play in society where we try to condense everything to one-liner accomplishments and these portable A4 papers we call our curriculum vitae and resume. I want each of us to think of our own resumes as our individual Waldos. The words listed on that page are a symbolic representation of you, contained within a nutshell. It's a combination of all those years of investing in yourself as prime human capital, structured neatly along a popular Word document format and set in size 12 font Times New Roman. Our Waldos, however, gain significance only in motion through time and space and set in a specific narrative. Existing in a flat two-dimensional vacuum such as the screen of a computer or held in the cold hands of a prospective employer, our Waldo has no story, is nowhere, and thus would get irretrievably lost in its own who. The question of where, however, doesn't ascribe to the categorization of individuals based solely on a geographic affiliation or connection. There's a question that is dreaded by most international citizens who constitute a visible racial minority. People like me, for a convenient example, who have markedly East Asian features that somehow make it incredulous that we could be from some other place in the world in Asia. Some, or all of you in the audience, may be familiar with this situation. You introduce yourself to a new acquaintance. Hey there, my name's Chaeri. Oh, hey Chaeri, nice to meet you. Likewise. So Chaeri, what do you do? Oh, I'm still a student in college. A third year already, actually. Oh, where? Abu Dhabi. Abu Dhabi? Cue a surprised look. Yeah, Abu Dhabi. What took you there? Well, the opportunity was unbeatable. And in my head, I plead, ask me more about why the opportunity was so unbeatable. It would be so much more interesting. Wow, that is interesting. But you're not from Abu Dhabi, are you? An accusatory, so tell me where you're really from type question. No, I'm from Canada. Oh, Canada. Cue a slightly disappointed stare. And then I feel obliged to rush in and say the magic words that they've been waiting for all along. But I'm originally from Korea. And their faces light up and they smile, relieved that their antennae for detecting faces and matching them to suitable stereotypes aren't broken at all. And everything in the world is fine again. The "so where are you from" question has become almost taboo in polite conversation, or as you have seen, it requires a couple minutes of build-up of non-intrusive banter because the emphasis is placed on the wrong word. It's a shade of divergence in tone from "where are you from" and "where are you from" that makes all the perceived cultural offense. So, the where question is much more fluid than one of those boring and flexible origin stories that are plotted out from north to south and east to west. At the same time, however, where I am is completely has to do with who and what else I'm surrounded by at that moment. Imagine trying to Photoshop all the other characters except Waldo from a Where's Waldo book. Wouldn't that be such a depressing sight? Waldo is defined by the people around him, the stories he's witness to, the environment he interacts with. We can't just pluck Waldo from his surroundings because to do so would result in a very sad, decontextualized man in a very bright sweater. And speaking of origin stories, as any good angsty teenager would be, I was often afflicted by existential crises growing up. I would envision myself as a broken jar where characteristic social habits and thoughts would pass in and out. I constantly wondered about when I would finally find who I was and who I was meant to be. Up until even a year ago, I struggled with being between two cultures. There was no easy way to explain the way that I viewed my cultural identity in the short 10 seconds I usually had to introduce myself. And then it finally dawned on me that there was no need to see myself as being circled in or restricted by the normal categories of identity, or to constantly make myself choose to be inside the circle or out. Instead, I choose to freely let myself be where I am, and oftentimes where I unexpectedly find myself to be. I think people should ask, so where are you in life now? Instead of the question of, who are you? because I especially find myself in the strangest of places these days. I find myself in the crisp edges of a beautifully fried egg, sunny side up, that brightens my day on the morning to my classes. I find myself ambitiously checking out 50 books from the library the day before writing my paper. And when I actively look for myself in the murky depths of my self-induced anxiety, which doesn't happen a lot, I find myself vacillating between there are a million pathways open after graduation to, oh my God, I never want to graduate. These are just some things, some silly, some random, that taken together make up my identity. So now that we've reached a mutual understanding of the significance of the where question, I want to ask you all to think of where you are now in your lives. I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about that. To situate yourself in a certain narrative, a certain context, even a geographic location, even though I distinctly discouraged you from doing that. You can't do that. We're on Saryat Island. The issue that I want to bring up here is that living in the 21st century, it's impossible to define one's identity without answering the question of where. Whether that be the identity that you hold on the sleeve of your heart or on the stiff covering of your passport. And it's not always easy to find yourself, but the more comfortable you become with the dynamic ways in which your Waldos dance and squirm and move throughout time and space, the easier it will be to find your Waldos. And once you do find your Waldo, there's no going back. The only direction is forward to the next page of the book. In closing, I'd like to cite the words of poet Mahmoud Darwish. Ana huna wa huna ana. I am, and here I am. Thank you.